Hi, this is Carrie Ann Reed Brown, and this is Carry On Friends, the Caribbean American podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Carry On Friends, the Caribbean American podcast. As always, I'm glad you're listening. I'm excited because I have a good friend of mine on the show today. Her name is Bie Aweh. Bie, how are you, my darling? It's not long time. I see you the other days.
I'm doing well. I'm doing terrific. Thank you for having me today.
Awesome. All right, so Bie, tell everybody a little bit about who you are, your background, your heritage, and all them good stuff.
Yeah, so Bie Aweh, as you mentioned, I like to say I have the best of both worlds. I'm Haitian and Cameroonian. That's where Aweh comes from, because people look at my last name, they're like, no, that's not Haitian. I'm like, I promise you I am. By way of Haiti and Cameroon, first generation American, meaning I was the first of my family myself and my twin sister were first of our family to be born in the States. And I think that has greatly impact how I move through the world and ultimately how I think about this topic of social capital, which we'll get in later. But professionally by day, I'm a associate director of learning and development. I see our North American offices, so making sure that we're understanding the business needs and creating learning opportunities to meet those business needs. And by night, I have my hands in a little bit of everything, but most recently, my sister and I, we got together and got an LLC around. My sister is focused on mental health, so she's a therapist, and I'm more focused on social capital and career development. And so helping people, specifically communities of color, understand what are their career goals, and B, who are the people that they need to be aligned with in order to accelerate those career goals. Because while I understand the value of education, I was fortunate enough to go get my master's and it was paid for. I don't feel like that's the only way for us to be successful in this world, particularly in this like really super heavy technological world that we're in today. So that's a little bit about me.
Yes. So you just packed a whole bunch in there and I want to unpack it. And I had to make a mental note because I was like, yes, your sister, we have to talk about that again. But anyway, so social capital is a buzzword. Everyone's talking about it. Like, what exactly is it? Just in case no one's ever heard the word social capital, what is it and why is it all the more important now?
Yeah. So for me, social capital is basically like the networks or relationships that you have that kind of help you to advance professionally, but also I would say as an individual. So what I mean, I think there's the capital that you get from going to certain schools, right? There's a capital that you get by going to Harvard or Stanford or things like that. But social capital says that how do you get in the room with those people without having to pay the Harvard or Stanford bill, and still be able to leverage that network? And so when I think about my experience, I went to pretty regular ass schools. I went to the University of New Hampshire undergrad, and most people are like, I don't even know what that is, or they conflate it with Dartmouth College, which is an Ivy League school. I'm like, no, I didn't go to Dartmouth. But what I did when I was at that point in my career, I knew I wanted to be in higher education. And so what I told myself is, because I went to these really regular schools, I was going to be strategic and work at top tier schools, right? Because that for me was about social capital. So even though I didn't go to a top tier school, I was damn sure going to work at one, because that gave me access to people in those rooms, in those spaces. And lo and behold, now that I have UC Berkeley on my resume, people don't even care that they don't even actually discern the fact that I didn't go there. They just see Berkeley on my name. And now I have access to so many rooms and people because they see Berkeley on my name. And so that for me is what social capital is about. How do you leverage these big names or individuals or entities and be able to, I don't want to say take advantage of, because I feel so negative, but how do you leverage those networks, those names, and be able to fulfill or accelerate your career goals or career, what is the word that I'm looking for? I'm losing the word, but basically
Career,
how do you
aspirations,
yeah. Yes. How do you leverage that? And so for me, that's what social capital basically is: being in those spaces and being able to not only be in the space, but also to be able to leverage those moments, those people, and those names.
Yeah, and one of the challenge about building a social capital, because let's be honest, right? Everybody have them little club and crew, and then I'll let you into the circle and all of this, and and lots of times, my grandmother used to use this word, and I know it might not resonate with people, but I got it using context clues. She's like, oh, I don't like it because it made me feel a little cute. And it was her way of saying she was embarrassed when she would try to reach out and make a connection with someone and they were, they never said like, I don't want to know you, but their behavior said otherwise.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
in Haiti, we have, or in Creole, we say it's sumun. You don't want to be sumun. You don't want to be the person who's like always on top of people or want to be on top of people, that type of thing. So I think I understand.
yeah. And so in that, you kind of get gun shy again if you want to try to reach out and make connections, because your first attempt is usually awkward. For some people, it's like, you're an introvert, you're shy, and some people are a little bit more outgoing. But, how do we make that first step to start building a social capital using, just whatever we have? So, okay, I don't have UC Berkeley or anything like that, but
Right.
how can we start where we are?
Absolutely. And I think that is so key in understanding that you have something to offer. So no matter where we are in this world, you have skills, you have like gifts, literally you have gifts that you can offer. And so whenever I talk to people about just like navigating networking, because essentially that's what it boils down to. But I think people get too caught up on the name networking. So if the name networking gives you too much anxiety, just call it something else, call it community building. But nonetheless, I think, first of all, you have to acknowledge that you have something to offer. You have gifts to offer. And so if you're an expert at social media, right, then that's your gift. If you're an expert at digital strategy, whatever that is, you have a gift. And so whenever you're entering these spaces or approaching people, be very clear about the value that you add. And so I think that's the first piece, is acknowledging that you have something to contribute no matter where you're coming from. I think secondly is and from there, thinking about how do you reciprocate, not being the person that only takes, right? Like, I'm taking from this experience, I'm taking from this person. Oh, can you have coffee with me because I want to know about your pathway. But what do you have to contribute to this relationship or this dynamic? Because you always want to make sure that you're reciprocating. You're giving as much as you're taking. So for me, I think those are the two biggest things, is to understand that you do have a gift. And it's all valuable, right? Because if someone can be the CEO of a company, right? And when we think about this within the context of social capital, from an outsider looking in, they have it all together. But the reality is, they may be struggling with one little small piece, and you can be that puzzle that helps to complete them. So understand that you have something to contribute, and then from there, just making sure that you're reciprocating, you're giving. And one of the ways I do this, when I go to networking events or just in different spaces, I'm just very intentional about like, hey, and one of the things I do, I connect with people based off their stories. So if you told me that you're like really fascinated in artificial intelligence, right? If I saw a cool article that came up on artificial intelligence, I'll send it to you. Like, hey, it was great meeting you the other day. This made me think of you. I just want to send this along. And that just shows that, again, you're not in it just for taking. You're making sure that you're giving and contributing to this relationship or to this partnership, however you want to frame it. So I think it's just really important to be mindful of contributing and giving just as much as you're receiving.
Yeah. So you want to be adding value.
Absolutely.
Now, so you said something earlier, and you said like, can we go out to coffee or something? But I see a lot of people are like, no, you can't take me out to coffee, pay my coaching fees, or like just little things. So it's getting much harder to connect with people naturally, because everyone is taking those opportunities for a connection as a way to monetize. And I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's just like, because it's their time, and if they want to put a cost on it, that's their choice and their prerogative. Right. Should, but it just makes it that much harder, especially if you're seeing people are like, no, you can't pick my brain, we can't do coffee. No, we can't.
Right. You can pick my brain as soon as the invoice is paid. I saw that kind of thing circulating through social media.
Yeah. So how do we get around that? Because that makes it super, super hard. And I'm not going to get into the whole coaching and putting a value on it, because I don't know if for our people, I see why our people would want to do it, but I don't think that's necessarily the best way to go about it, because
I agree.
You're gating something that, I don't know if you're going to be gated at that level, or people at that level are gating their connection, because I feel like in my job, people just want to get to know each other, because to say, okay, I know people, or have conversations, because they don't know what they don't know, and they start having conversations. So I don't know if it's essential for us to start putting a price tag on just having brief conversations. I think I think the challenge is more of like, I'm a Tata box. We talk a lot, right? So the challenge would be talk to you enough to give you what you want, but anything beyond a certain point, it's time for you to monetize. But it seems like, no, just to have a conversation is to be monetized. And it's for people who are trying to build a social capital, this is extremely frustrating, intimidating, and you see why then they don't have a social capital, because they're on the outside of the club, they can't get in. And so what are your thoughts on this? How do we navigate around that?
Yeah, it's so tricky. And to your point, like I can understand why people are doing this, but also I have so many thoughts. So the first place I want to begin at is I think I understand why people do it. And I think it's like counterproductive. Particularly when we think about for us as Black people and the history and how we are, how we've gotten to where we are today is because of that community, that community-centered focus, right? Like I am because you are, and we contribute to each other. So I think that kind of thinking is counterproductive to that. But beyond that, I would say folks are strapped for time, and I think that's why it becomes even more important and critical to kind of understand what the value you add to this conversation is. So it's not only you asking them for coffee. Folks are too busy, so how can you meet them where they're at, right? If they're going to be, and this requires you to do your due diligence and your research, but you can't necessarily get on their books to get on coffee. But if you know they're speaking at an event, well, I think it's really important for you to be at that event. Maybe you can get 5 minutes of their time there and really personalize the approach. And once you're able to personalize the approach, maybe they're much more willing to go to coffee or to a drink with you. But I think it is important. I think that's where empathy comes in, to understand that some people are really, really strapped for time, especially when we think about the super mega influencers in our world. A lot of them are strapped for time. So it's important to meet them where they're at. So if you know they're going to be at an event, you need to be at that event. I think the second thing from that is, so I talked about value add, I talked about meeting them where they're at. And I just think, I don't know. For me, when people reach out to me, a lot of people reach out to me for just like a career advice, and I'll always take the initial call. I think it's important to give back. No matter, and I'm not even at the most ultimate stage of my career, but I think it's really important to give back because those are the people the same people have done those things for me. So for me, I always take the initial call and making sure that I'm referring to resources. But, and this has happened to me recently, someone reached out and I took the time to connect, and this is somebody I went to high school with, and they had asked for an intro. And this is how you burn bridges, and this is how it impacts your brand. Therefore, thinking about social capital, how all these things are interconnected. So he told me what he was interested in. I'm like, oh, this is great. I know the perfect person for you to speak to. And I don't want to say I'm selective with my network, but I take a lot of time to cultivate and build and nurture my network. And so I'm very intentional about when I open that up to people. And so he's like, yeah, this would be great. So I facilitated the introduction, and homie never even responded to the email. And that hasn't responded to texts since and things like that. And so what I share that to say, like, if you're going to ask someone for their time, you need to be able to show up. You need to be able to do the work. So sometimes we fall short too. And that's why people are putting up these barriers that says, hey, the invoice needs to be paid. So I think some of the onus is on us to show up and make sure that we're doing the work. And I think on the other side is for people to move away from this pretentiousness, because that's almost what it feels like, oh, I'm above this, and you need to pay me for my time. So moving away from the pretentiousness and also making sure that we're showing up and doing the work.
You said something about influencers, and I think naturally, and I'm just going to use this as an example. So naturally, people are going to want to reach out to the most famous person or the biggest names that they see. And I'm like, man, you can't come from the womb and start running like you saying already. You got you creep to make babies.
You got to crawl before you walk.
Yeah, you got to have a crawl. And so, you have to start because I remember an experience where someone was like, well, you're not a lawyer. When I used to be a paralegal, I'm like, no, I am a paralegal. I do most of the work, and I have the influence. I can influence the attorney. So if you don't want to speak to me, I can always influence the attorney. So the point there is like, the bigger name is good to make a connection, but don't lose sight of people who are closer to your network, closer to your reach.
Absolutely.
And making those connections as well, because you'll be surprised. I think a lot of times we get involved, like if I want a show and Steve Harvey's there, yeah, Steve Harvey's a nice person to talk to, but I would not discount his AD, his associate or AP, his associate producer or someone, because they're the ones actually running the show and they have influence. And I think we get caught up in the celebrity of the face of a brand and not the people behind the brand, the people who are moving and shaking. We already know that there's so many things happening. So how do you find the people behind the scenes, or like, how do you make connections with, how do you find those people? Because all the time you don't always see them. You see the face, but you don't see the people behind the scene.
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And, that's what made me start. So I started running the 30 not under 30 list.
I remember
started
that
2 years ago. And why I came to that is because of what you just said. And Issa Rae had said it. She basically said that we're always focusing on networking up rather than networking across. And to your point, right? Like the powerful people behind the work, they're usually right next to us. And so sometimes we're so starstruck, we'll focus on trying to get up top. So absolutely. And I think living in the Bay Area really taught me that, is that the people that you see on the list and all those type of things, and whatever it is, they're great, but I think they're even incredible people, sitting beside me. And I learned that when I met Hadia Mujahid, who's the founder of HBCUBC, and she just keeps a low profile, but she does a phenomenal work. She's a brilliant ass woman. And when I think about social capital and how I was able to develop my business acumen, it was because of her, or it continues to be because of her. So I just think, to your question about how do you find them? Again, I think it's about, so I set the intention of going to a networking event at least twice a week. Sometimes it'll be a little bit more. Sometimes maybe it's like one. I don't necessarily meet my goal, but as an introvert, it's important for me to challenge myself to do that. So when I'm in those spaces, people are constantly running to go talk to the panelists. I'm talking to the people next to me. And I found more value with connecting to the people next to me rather than trying to run, bum rush the stage and talk to the panelists afterwards. Because I feel like sometimes panels are a little annoying to me because it's just people just talking
at you.
Talking at you and not actually providing any value. So I think that my challenge to everyone listening today is, when you're going to networking events, use the panelists and the conversations that are coming from there to propel the conversations that you have with people in the space. And you truly never know what comes of it. And especially if you're like job searching or something like that, at meetups, they literally send recruiters to meetups, right? And the recruiters are not necessarily the people on the stage. The recruiters are there to mingle with people like you, folks in the space. And so I think it's just really important to making sure that you're honoring your neighbor and talk to your neighbor, because that person could potentially change your career.
That is so true. And my thing is always, you said, the people across from you, there's also people below you that for right now, like, I've heard this complaint, like someone doesn't want to have time for this person because they're not at their level and they're not at the level that they're trying to know. But, someone can like skip right over you because they were sitting on an opportunity and they just met the right person. So I feel like, when you're building a network, it's down, across, up. Always try to make sure that we have that roundedness, because, when in all the opportunities that I've been able to mentor people, the people I've managed, they've been technically people who are below me because I'm their manager, but I've always learned so much from them because they have great ideas, they have their own thoughts, and they want someone to hear them and give them feedback. And the connections you keep or after that is just so amazing. And they remember how you make them feel. And that's the whole point of, like you said, the social capital. It's just building that relationship. And I think because we're in this technology age, we want the results of the relationship to happen
instantly,
very quickly.
Yeah.
But it's just, hey, like, we're on Instagram or you're on Twitter. Hey, how you doing? I haven't spoken to you in a while. I'm good. I'm getting married. Or, you see someone get engaged and you're still keeping that relationship warm.
Absolutely.
Just by being in their lives. I think we can't lose sight of, making connections with people at all levels, up,
Absolutely.
down, and across.
Absolutely.
So,
And to your point, like, it's so easy. And I always tell people this, it's so easy to make that instant connection. Like, I can go to a networking event and meet like 5 people, but what am I doing to sustain those connections? And I think that's where people lose. They don't do anything to invest and sustain the connection over long term. And therefore, then it definitely feels like it's like a one-sided relationship where you're only reaching out to the person for a referral or something like that.
And to your point, so yes, when someone reaches out or you're always asking for something, but what if you understand the value of building a social capital and you're reaching out and, the other person not really paying you no mind and they're not really checking for you? At what point do you say, what, these people are really great people. It's really good to know them, but they're not interested in maintaining or, a social connection or any connection with me. How do you deal with that?
I think certainly it's challenging, but after multiple attempts and you're not receiving any responses, it's like on to the next person. Or, you have the opportunity to be strategic about how can I penetrate this from another angle, right? And so to your point around networking and building relationships below, and I don't want to equate, being an executive assistant as below, but like, how do you reach out to that person's executive assistant? Because that person, that EA knows that person way more intimately than you will ever will. And also, obviously, they have ownership over the calendar. Right. And so that can be a more strategic way to get on the board. But to your point around, like, you're being persistent and you're not getting anything, I think it's okay to walk away. Right. Because everyone's not for you. And that's okay to acknowledge. And I think there's opportunity to just like develop a more meaningful connection elsewhere. So like you can be persistent, and if you're not getting any response back, it's okay to walk away. Or, certainly you can try to exhaust all options. But I think at some point you have to be honest with yourself and say, hey, this is not working. Let me go try to build with someone else who's willing to actually talk to me.
Yeah. Now, so I know this is a long topic. We talk about it. So let's kind of wrap up on a few key things.
Mm-hmm.
So building your social capital, 3 things to get started if you haven't already, or things that you can improve on if you kind of started, but you're not consistent.
Yeah, I would say the first thing is to set the intention of networking. And networking doesn't necessarily have to go to networking events. It can happen online, right? Like, so I'm a huge geek for LinkedIn. I live on LinkedIn. And so there's so much opportunity to build relationships with people. But the key thing there is to make sure that you're investing in sustaining that relationship over time. The second thing is, I see people do this all the time, and this is no judgment, and I want to say, like, you don't have to go back to school for this social capital. There's so much learning that happens in our day-to-day world. And I hate to see particularly our communities get stuck with so much debt just to say they went to NYU. Like, if NYU is fully funding it, then that's great. But if you're coming out of pocket $60,000 a year, no, there's other ways to get that kind of access to those people in those rooms. So just be mindful of that. And I would say, what's the last thing around social capital? So we're sustaining the relationships. We're knowing that that social capital is not equated to taking on more student loan debt. And the third thing is just be mindful or get confident around the value you add. Not only get confident, but be able to articulate it. What is the value you add? And so making sure when you're asking someone for their time, be very clear about what you have to offer.
I like that. We have to, this is the Caribbean American podcast, and Caribbean Americans, school is a big thing,
Yeah, so school's a very important thing.
So we have to dissect that one part, because I feel like, I've had conversations with people who said they're going to go back to school. I'm like, you're going to take on what debt to get a job that probably won't pay you that overtime, and you may not, so there's definitely some arguments for, but, like you said, like the debt situation, especially for us here in the US, is that worth the potential? And potential is a huge word, because, if you're not doing it right, we could go to NYU, Columbia, all we want, but if we're not doing the social capital right, we're not going to reap the benefits just by having Columbia and NYU.
Absolutely. It's not enough to just go there. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not enough. All right. So what can I do better today? So that's for someone who's starting out. So what can I do better today to level up in terms of my social capital. So I do go to, networking events. When I go to networking events, I said, my goal is to meet two different people and just try to, have a conversation. It's not like, oh, I'm gonna get their email and tell them that I do a podcast. I just want to have a conversation. I think we did that when we went to Haiti Tech Summit. And I think because we were super focused on like, these are just the two things we're trying to accomplish. We accomplished a bit more because we're very targeted. So I'm going to networking events. I am meeting people, but I don't, it just still feels like I just know all these people. I don't know anything else. What am I doing? I'm not looking for a job. I'm okay. So what do I do with all that activity?
Right. I think that's a great question. What do I do to kind of, sustain and contribute to the relationship? So I'm thinking about the people that I've met at various conferences. I shared the example before around just like, if I knew someone is really excited about XYZ thing, if I come across XYZ thing, I'm like, hey, this made me think of you. Just wanted to share it. How are you doing? And that's an opportunity to just like segue into like a check-in. Like, hey, I just wanted to check in on how you're doing. This article made me think of you. Just checking in. What are some other ways to kind of sustain the relationship? I think the sharing of like quote unquote random articles has been best for me. What else have I done? Events. When I think about events, so if again thinking about because I connect with people through stories, if I know this event is happening in the city, hey, this is happening, this is free, do you want to go together? Or hey, this free webinar is happening, this made me think of you, you should totally check this out, how are you doing? And so I think that's an opportunity, there's an opportunity to do that. So one of my big kind of passion areas outside of work is working out. And so being able to really connect with people on that, like, hey, Bie, I see you work out together, or I see you work out a lot. Let's work out together. Let's go running together. Right. So that's been another point of connection for me. And so I say that to say there's an opportunity to use your social media, specifically in this instance, like Instagram, very strategically to facilitate other kind of opportunities. And so people know I'm really into working out. And so that has facilitated ways to not only work out with other people, but also segue into other professional opportunities. And so talk about yourself in your entirety, right? Like I think LinkedIn and things like that, it's important to center yourself as a professional, but you're also, what makes you unique is what makes you you. And so being able to kind of demonstrate that on your social media platforms can facilitate other opportunities to connect with people in other ways, like other ways that you didn't think were possible.
I like that. The working out is akin to, executives going to go play golf. It's how they make connections. You make connections in the gym, and you'll be surprised how many people like CrossFit and all that stuff and make connections on that.
Yeah.
So,
or, of being of Caribbean ancestry, right? Like,
yes.
I had posted something about Haiti or something like that. No, I was in Nigeria and people were like, oh my God, I didn't know you were Nigerian. I'm like, I'm not. But like, that was another opportunity to connect with people. So being your holistic true self, I think centering that beyond just being somebody who works 9 to 5 or whatever, or sometimes occasionally attends these events. I think there's opportunity to do that. And most importantly, your thought leadership. And so whether you have a podcast like this one, which I think is incredible, or you are actually a writer or you're a vlogger, put that stuff into the ethos and people will, where it connects, and the people that need to hear it will hear it, and therefore they'll come to you. So I think there's an opportunity to leverage creativity in that way.
All right, Bie, this was amazing. We have to come back and have more conversations because I think social capital is kind of the foundation that we need to build on, whether you want to do both a side hustle and a full-time job, or whether you just want to work, or whether you want to be an entrepreneur. It is such a critical aspect as to how we navigate the world now. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing this. For sure, we're going to have you back on. Any last thoughts on before we leave?
And actually, that reminds me of one thing. So one of the things that I'm very intentional of doing, particularly with when I think about online communities. So if I have an ask of the group, if I need a referral at XYZ company, it's fine to have an ask, but also making sure that you have a give. So one of the communities that I'm a part of, whenever you have an ask, you have to have a give. So it's like, hey, everybody, my ask is, I need this referral from Lyft or whatever. My give is, I'm willing to provide feedback on LinkedIn, right? So making sure that that's an approach you should take with life in general, right? Not just like on online communities, but that's an approach you should take with life in general. So I will just leave folks with that.
I like ending on that. If you're going to have an ask, make sure you have a give. I love it. I love it.
Yes.
All right. So on that note, Bie, thank you again for being on the show. And everybody, walk good. You've been listening to Carry On Friends, a show about the Caribbean American experience. We post new episodes every 2 weeks. And if you want to learn more, buy merchandise, or sign up for our newsletter, check out our website, carryonfriends.com. The Carry On Friends podcast is produced by Breadfruit Media, and new episodes are available every other Tuesday morning. You can listen to the podcast on the website, carryonfriends.com, or you can listen on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, or wherever you like to listen to your podcast.